Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. A hiker eases off the shoulder on Lee Canyon Road, high above Las Vegas. 20 yards from the asphalt, a woman lies in sleepwear. A towel is tied around her neck. A caustic residue dusts exposed skin and fabric. No 911 was placed from her home. Someone took time to move her here, and time to try to erase what they did. Clark County deputies mark off a perimeter in the late afternoon light, then expand it to include tire impressions that angle in, stop, and turn back toward U.Est. 95. There is no blood pooling, no impact spatter, and no disturbance pattern consistent with a struggle. The ground is dry and wind-scoured. This site is a dump location, not a killing floor. Technicians grid the area and work quadrant by quadrant. They tag drag marks faintly visible across the crusted soil and collect control samples of dirt and plant matter for later comparison to any vehicle undercarriage we might seize. The towel matters. It can mask a ligature groove and contaminate readings of depth and direction. Crime Lab photographs the neck, measures knot placement, and preserves the cloth inside paper to prevent moisture damage. The residue matters, too. Field test strips indicate a high alkaline substance consistent with lye. It accelerates soft tissue breakdown. It doesn't erase timelines, fibers, or tool marks. We bag loose granules from the edges of skin and clothing for chemical profiling and potential sourcing. Her attire is specific, top and bottoms meant for home, not travel. There are no shoes at the scene. The absence of personal items, purse, phone, keys, suggests removal elsewhere. That absence also shapes the first operational hypothesis: transport by vehicle after death or near death, brief off-road stop, body deposited near tree line, chemical applied, departure. The pattern is practiced enough to show planning, clumsy enough to leave options for us: tire class characteristics, soil transfers, microfibers on fabric that's already shedding. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. When the desert tells you nothing happened here, you go looking for the room where it did. We call in a canvas for known cameras along the approach corridors, gas stations, convenience stores, the turnoff at the interchange. Detectives push out requests for recent purchases of lye at hardware stores within a reasonable drive radius and query distributors for bulk sales. We flag tips mentioning a woman missing in the last week, and we hold back the towel detail to screen out false admissions. Body recovery is slow by design. The remains are lifted on a clean sheet to catch anything that falls free. Every contact point is logged. The scene commander keeps the action list short and sequence locked: protect, photograph, collect, verify. No improvisation. The desert keeps its secrets unless you make it explain itself. In cities like Las Vegas, murders aren't just crimes, they cut into the fabric of a family and leave a scene that never quite closes. Up here, the wind moves on and the evidence stays. Down there, somebody knows why sleepwear became the last thing she ever wore. Hi, and welcome back to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. The scene in the mountains gave us a body and a clock. What we needed next was a name. At the coroner's office, technicians rehydrated fingertip skin and captured ridge detail. AFIS returned a hit: Maria Marino, 52, Las Vegas. The match was clean. With identity confirmed, the work moved off the highway and into the city, toward the address where she was known, the people who expected her, and the routines that had suddenly stopped. Notification protocol came first. Detectives verified the residence and a short list of immediate relatives. The point of contact was her elderly father, Alfred Ross. Other adults associated with the home included an older sister, a brother-in-law, and a niece who spent time there. No accusations, no labels, just a basic map of who lived in proximity to Maria's daily life and finances. In Clark County, routine beats drama, names come before narratives. We pulled the simple threads first. Neighbors were asked about last sightings, unusual noise, vehicles in or out, and whether anyone had seen Maria leave in daytime clothing. Several confirmed a gap: no one had seen her walking the dog, collecting mail, or stepping out for groceries in the days before discovery. Patrol checked CAD history for recent calls at the address. There was no 911 from the home during the window now under review. That absence doesn't decide a case, but it shapes where you look. While next of kin arrangements moved forward, the investigative team split into lanes. One lane handled victimology, work history, medical info, known stressors, and her role inside the household. Public records and interviews aligned on a key fact: Maria managed family finances. Bills, accounts, and routine purchases often went through her. That level of responsibility can be neutral, or it can build pressure. We didn't speculate, we documented who had access to which accounts, which cards, and which recurring payments. A second lane opened the digital trail. We secured legal process for call detail records and basic tower activity for the days leading up to discovery. We weren't looking for complex patterns, just the kind of voids that stand out, phones that go quiet together, devices that stop authenticating on home Wi-Fi at the same minute, cards that continue to buy ordinary items when the person using them is no longer present to use them. The first pass revealed normal chatter earlier in the week and then a taper. Nothing conclusive yet, enough to keep the window tight. The home visit was controlled and methodical. Detectives requested cooperation, documented conditions, and noted who had keys and regular entry. We did not broadcast what was found in the mountains. Holding back certain details helps later when explanations begin to form. Inside, we logged ordinary things: a television paused mid-program, a calendar entry unchecked, prescription bottles with known refill dates. The goal wasn't drama. It was alignment. Does the house reflect a person who planned to be gone? Financial review began the same day. Subpoenas went out for recent hardware and chemical purchases within a defined radius, matched against cards associated with the household. Investigators requested surveillance pulls along the obvious corridor from the city toward the mountains, gas stations at key exits, convenience stores with outward-facing cameras. Not a dragnet, just a corridor check that could catch a vehicle class, a plate fragment, or a timestamp that later pins down movement. At the medical examiner's office, autopsy scheduling locked in. Identification allowed formal next steps. Cause and manner of death would be established independently of any neighborhood rumor or family dynamic. When a case touches relatives, independence is the anchor. The team's internal note was blunt: do not treat tension around money as a conclusion, treat it as context that requires proof. Human value sits inside these steps. A name restores dignity. A precise timeline honors truth over rumor. Families deserve accuracy, not theater. If you've ever had to wait for a call about someone you love, you know why the pacing matters. We move quickly where we can, and we slow down where evidence demands it. An investigator put it this way on the board: before we search for a suspect, confirm the person. Before we chase a route, confirm the home. The data would tell us if the house was simply where Maria slept, or the place where everything changed. By the morning after identification, the work moved to the address tied to Maria Marino. The approach was low-key and professional. Detectives requested consent to look through common areas, logged who had regular access, and documented the condition of each room before a single item was touched. When consent narrowed, a warrant followed. The purpose was not to argue with anyone inside but to answer one question: did this house carry the marks of the primary scene? Room by room, small things added up. In the living area, sections of carpet looked recently shampooed in uneven rectangles. A handheld light didn't show obvious staining, but white patterns were visible at angles along the baseboards. On a bookshelf near the television, a plastic cradle for a household fire extinguisher sat empty. In the kitchen, a canister of multipurpose cleaner and a new sponge were on the counter with a receipt dated inside our window. In the laundry area, the washer gasket was clean and still damp. The lint trap had been emptied within the last day. None of this proved violence by itself. Together, it suggested a space reset quickly. Technicians worked with simple tools first: photographs, swabs, and vacuum lifts. A thin dusting from the living room floor tested consistent with dry chemical extinguisher residue. On a sofa cushion, a vacuum sample pulled short, smooth fibers with a coppery thread at the core, consistent with the tiny shavings that come off speaker wire when it's cut and stripped. The fibers weren't proof of a ligature on their own, but they aligned with what was found on clothing at the morgue. The towel around Maria's neck had been bagged at the desert scene, that evidence stayed sealed, and we did not disclose it inside the house. Holding back specifics guards the integrity of later statements. At the entry, a set of hooks held keys labeled for everyday use. A spare key to a family sedan was there. The vehicle itself was parked at the curb. Detectives noted the trunk liner felt recently washed, clean, but wavy where moisture had dried. The spare tire well was dry. Floor mats showed light brush marks inconsistent with normal vacuuming. Nothing dramatic, only the signs of people cleaning with urgency. In the bathroom, a cotton towel was missing from a matched set. The gap wasn't announced, it was documented with photos and inventory notes. Under a sink, a half-used container of drain cleaners sat next to rubber gloves. These are ordinary items in most homes. The timeline on purchase receipts would tell us if they were ordinary here during the days that mattered. Digital checks ran parallel to the physical search. The home router showed expected devices, a couple of phones, a laptop, a smart TV. Logs indicated routine nighttime connections earlier in the week and then a sudden quiet stretch. That quiet echoed what neighbors had already said about not seeing Maria outside. Again, not a conclusion, just alignment. Interviews were careful and respectful. Each adult associated with the home was asked for standard identifiers, work schedules, and the last confirmed time they saw Maria inside the house. We asked for permission to collect clothing worn during the window and to photograph the interiors of their vehicles. No accusations, no theories, no gotcha questions. People deserve to be heard once before they hear what we found. Back in evidence, the priority was to connect house samples to the desert. Soil control from the dump site and carpet debris from the living room went to the lab side by side. The extinguisher residue from the floor was packaged separately. The goal was simply to confirm what product type it matched and whether any corresponding unit in the home had been recently discharged. A warrant for purchase records covered lye or heavy alkaline products at nearby stores. If a card tied to the residence had bought any within the window, a receipt and a timestamp would push the case forward. The human part of this is straightforward. A primary scene is not just where a life ended. It is where truth begins. When investigators knock on a door after a death, they carry two obligations: preserve what can still speak, and avoid writing stories the facts can't support. That balance is why we collected quietly, checked timelines twice, and kept the towel detail to ourselves. As the team rolled evidence carts out to the van, one detective said what many were thinking: homes don't go sterile by accident. In a city that runs on motion, silence inside four walls can be louder than any confession. If the desert was the place someone tried to take time, the house looked more and more like the place they first ran out of it. At the medical examiner's office, the file moved from identity to cause and manner. The exam was standard, the documentation exact. Markings at the neck showed a deep, consistent furrow with patterned impressions that matched a narrow, pliable ligature. The line tracked upward behind the ears, consistent with sustained force rather than a single yank. Petechiae were present on conjunctiva. There were no defensive cuts on the hands. The conclusion was methodical and independent of any interview: death by ligature strangulation, homicide. The towel recovered at the mountain was examined in parallel. Fabric mapping showed compression and fiber transfer along the inner fold, explaining why the groove on the skin looked muted at first glance. The point wasn't theatrics, it was sequence. The cloth wasn't a murder weapon. It was a mask, used after or during the application of the ligature to blunt what the body would later reveal. That choice told us someone was thinking about what a coroner would see. Tissue samples underwent routine toxicology. Nothing in those panels changed the finding. What mattered more was trace recovery. From the neck area and clothing layers, technicians lifted microstrands with a copper core under the microscope, thin shavings that form when common two-conductor audio wire is stripped and twisted. Lab notes compared the morphology to reference samples from local retailers. It's not a serial number, but in domestic cases, a common household supply can be enough to pin time and access when paired with receipts or a search. Chemistry added another piece. The granular residue collected at the dump site and preserved from the clothing was analyzed for composition. Results came back as a strong sodium hydroxide profile, consistent with consumer lye products. The point wasn't to shock, it was to timestamp and source. Hardware store lye isn't rare. Brand and batch can still give you a retailer and a window. Investigators already had subpoenas out. Now they had a target matrix, which cards linked to the household bought high alkaline products in the week before discovery, and where. The body's condition also set boundaries on transport and delay. There were no road rash abrasions or dessert debris embedded deep in wounds. The deposition was purposeful and brief. Stomach contents and insect activity placed a post-mortem window that fit the period the house had gone quiet. None of that accused anyone by name. It simply aligned the lab with the clock on the wall. Back at evidence, the towel remained a quiet screen test for future statements. No one outside the team knew it had blocked the furrow. If, down the line, a person volunteered that detail to explain what happened, we would know they were more than a bystander. In cases like this, the first thing people try to erase is time. The second is their own proximity. The vehicle work started in the same measured way. Swabs from a trunk liner that looked recently washed yielded low-level detergents and no obvious blood. That isn't a dead end, it's a direction. The absence of biological material after heavy cleaning still leaves behind class characteristics, soils, plant particulates, fibers, that can be compared to what was bagged in the desert. Analysts documented the liner's weave, the adhesive pattern along cut edges, and the way moisture had dried in uneven waves. It's ordinary to most eyes, it's a timeline to us. None of this hinged on how anyone in the house felt about the investigation, or about one another. The autopsy didn't care about family politics. The lab didn't care about rumors. It cared about the angle of a groove, the shape of a fiber, the chemistry of a granule, and whether purchase records could verify that those granules were picked up at a store we could name, on a day we could prove. In towns big or small, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a community. Precision is how you respect that. One line went on the case board, the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. If every piece points away from conflict, you're probably staring at the cleanup, not the cause. The job is to separate what someone arranged from what physics insists on. Gravity writes honestly. So do fibers and ions. There's a human reason we keep the tone plain. Families deserve clarity they can repeat back without guesswork. Ligature strangulation is clinical, but it is also specific. It says how, without inventing why. It keeps space for the truth that will arrive later, from a lab hit, a receipt, or a person who finally decides to talk. The next phase was clocks, not opinions. We built a minute-by-minute line from Friday, May 23, 2008 to the discovery on Wednesday, May 28. Every device, receipt, and camera we could lawfully reach went on the board. The point was to see who was where when Maria Marino stopped leaving footprints in her own life. Phone records showed routine activity early on May 23. Short calls. A text about a bill due. Nothing after late evening. Her handset didn't ping another tower, didn't join public Wi-Fi, and didn't register a new charge. A quiet phone is not guilt, but a quiet phone when a person vanishes is a flag. We logged the last time her number touched the home router. It matched what neighbors had told us. After a certain hour, everything went still. Bank data added weight. One household card bought common cleaning items late on May 24th at a store within a short drive of the residence. Another transaction on May 25th showed fuel purchased off U.S. 95, the same corridor that leads to Lee Canyon. The receipts carried timestamps and terminal IDs. We pulled low-res exterior camera footage where available. It was enough to class a sedan, capture a partial plate fragment under glare, and mark the pump used. The images were not dramatic. They were reliable. The car at the home was a match for the class captured at the pump. DMV records lined up on make and year. That did not prove it left the city with a body. It proved a vehicle tied to the residence took fuel on a route that ends in the mountains during the window we cared about. The trunk liner had already drawn attention in Chapter 3. Now the timeline gave that detail a place to sit. Utility records painted a steady picture. On May 23rd, power use at the residence tracked a normal evening curve and then dipped. There were no later spikes that would suggest heavy appliance use overnight. Water usage was modest, not nothing, but higher than weekday norms during the morning of May 24th. We did not guess why. We marked the numbers and kept moving. We cross-checked work claims. Adults associated with the home provided schedules and time cards. Payroll confirmed the basics. But there were gaps. One person had a partial shift on May 24th with a late arrival. Another cited errands. When we matched those claims against the purchase timestamps, a small knot formed. Explanations that felt smooth at the table did not stay smooth on the board. A gas station on the outbound side of U.S. 95 had an interior camera pointed toward the entrance. In the lower corner of the frame, a reflection showed a figure at a pump for under 3 minutes, then the sedan pulling out toward the highway. The time was early morning on May 25th. The return trip never appeared on the inbound cameras we checked. That was not unusual. Camera coverage is patchy on long corridors. What mattered was our corridor anchor, one stop, one plate fragment, one clock tick we could prove. We overlaid all of it, phones, router, bank, fuel, utilities, on a single line. The pattern looked tidy. Too tidy. That phrase went on the margin again, the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. In domestic homicides, neat timelines can be the shell left after cleanup. Our job is to crack the shell without adding pieces that were never there. A quiet house can be a living person's choice. It can also be a cover. The medical examiner's post-mortem window fit the days when the router fell silent and the neighbors stopped seeing Maria outside. That alignment was not a conclusion by itself. It told us the when of the homicide lived close to home, not in the mountains. We still needed granularity inside the residence. We requested a focused follow-up, clothing surrendered for voluntary elimination samples, vehicles photographed in better light, and any household products that matched the chemicals found on clothing at the dump site. The team tracked which family member had access to which car keys and when. We kept the towel detail sealed. Anyone who volunteered that knowledge would reveal proximity we hadn't disclosed. Human context matters in how you carry this work. Timelines are not just a trap for suspects. They are a way to respect the person who is gone. A clean timeline gives a family answers they can repeat without getting pulled into rumor. In towns and cities across America, murders don't just take lives. They distort everyone's sense of time. Bringing the clock back to what really happened is part of justice. By the end of the week, the board held a coherent set of markers: a last night at home, a dead phone, a quiet router, a chemical purchase in range, a fuel stop on the mountain corridor, and a car class that matched the one at the curb. None of it named a killer. All of it pointed away from an abduction by a stranger. The road to empty Charleston looked like a plan, not a coincidence. There was one more lane to open: direct contradictions. We scheduled formal interviews with each adult tied to the residence. The questions would be narrow. Tell us the last time you saw Maria inside the house. Tell us when the vehicle left and returned on the dates in question. Tell us who bought what and why. Sometimes the first answer is enough. Sometimes the second is the one people live with. After the first surge of activity, the file didn't disappear. It settled into the rhythm of a long case, evidence guarded, leads reviewed on a schedule, and the lab re-asked to look with new tools when they arrived. The goal across 2008 to 2011 was simple: hold the line on what we could prove and keep the door open for anything we had missed. Property control reinventoried every exhibit. Clothing was preserved under climate control for future trace work. Soil from the mountain corridor was split into aliquots so new comparisons wouldn't consume the originals. The trunk liner swabs and vacuum lifts were archived with detailed chain of custody notes. Nothing left its box without a logged reason. Families deserve answers that survive court, not just rumor. Technology quietly improved. By mid-2009, the crime lab had added upgraded micro-FTIR and better low-template DNA protocols. We didn't expect a profile from the towel or the clothing due to condition and time, but the new methods improved our odds of recovering additional fibers and residues. A second pass on the vacuum lifts from the living room cushion produced more of the same copper cord microstrands we had seen in the first run, consistent with cut 2-conductor audio wire. That didn't name anyone, it confirmed the earlier finding with stronger instrumentation and preserved images suitable for court. Purchasing patterns stayed on the table. Subpoenas that had once returned paper logs were reissued where companies had migrated to searchable archives. The target set was narrow, high-alkaline products and routine cleaning supplies sold near the residence in the days before discovery. Investigators updated the retailer list as change changed hands. Several hits matched the right time window but lacked a readable card imprint. We filed them, not as conclusions, but as timestamps that might pair with a future statement or a better camera angle we hadn't yet found. Detectives spoke again with neighbors, short, respectful recontacts that avoided re-traumatizing people who had already helped. A few remembered small things more clearly with time: a vehicle leaving earlier than usual one morning, porch lights left on late, a dog not barking when it typically did. These weren't breakthroughs. They were calibration points that matched the corridor fuel stop and tightened the window between the last known routine and the trip toward the mountains. The medical examiner's office contributed a quiet, important update. As new reference sets were published, our casework notes on ligature depth variance and knot positioning were reviewed against broader datasets of domestic strangulations. The pattern in this file fell neatly within known ranges for sustained pressure with a narrow, flexible ligature applied from behind or from the side while the victim was restrained. Again, this did not tell us who. It improved how precisely we could testify to the how, independent of any later admission. The digital lane remained lean by design. The phone records, router logs, and utility data that framed the late May timeline were verified a second time to ensure nothing had been misread. The outbound fuel stop toward Lee Canyon stayed the single best hard anchor on movement. Analysts rechecked inbound cameras and newly installed systems along U.S. 95. No return hit emerged, which wasn't unusual given coverage in that period. We did not inflate the absence into a theory. We kept it as a boundary condition. Interviews were revisited selectively. Adults tied to the residence were asked narrow follow-ups that were easy to verify: which vehicle was used on which day, who had access to which keys, which stores were common for household items. Answers were logged without editorializing. The practice was routine for a reason. Cases like this often turn when a later account drifts a little too far from a record we can pull. One line sat on the board to keep us honest: the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Clean alignment can mean careful staging. It can also mean we're dealing with people who rehearsed their days and cleaned their spaces as a matter of habit. Our job was to separate habit from concealment without inventing either. What kept the case alive wasn't theatrics. It was patience and fidelity to small facts, an archived receipt that might one day match a statement, a fiber image that a defense expert cannot shake, a timestamp that forces movement into a narrow lane. In towns across America, families live with years like this, waiting, hoping the quiet work continues even when cameras move on. Precision is a form of respect. The shift didn't come from a gadget. It came from persistence. By late 2011, a new voice entered the picture, someone already inside the justice system, volunteering information that touched details we had never made public. We didn't treat that as a confession. We treated it as a claim to be tested against knots, fibers, chemicals, and clocks we already owned. The new account arrived from a jail pod, someone tied to the family, already serving time on an unrelated case. He asked to talk. We didn't treat it as truth. We treated it as data to test against what we had kept quiet for 3 years. The interview ran under recording, with an evidence tech on standby and the case board hidden from view. We asked open prompts, then stopped talking. He described a fight inside the house days before the discovery window. He said a household tool, blunt, pulled from a common area, was swung first. He did not know we had documented an empty wall mount where a fire extinguisher should have been. He said a cord was fetched next, thin, from the stereo, and looped from behind. He did not know we had copper cord micros from the living room cushion and clothing. He said a cloth was wrapped around the neck to hide the mark. He did not know the towel had masked the furrow. 3 held back details, volunteered without coaching. He laid out the movement after death. The body, he said, left in the trunk of a family sedan. The car we had already tied to an outbound fuel stop on U.S. 95. He sketched the route with enough accuracy to hit Lee Canyon Road without a map. He said there was a delay, hours into days, before a final drop. He did not know the medical examiner's window, or that insect activity matched a staggered timeline. When an inmate claims a sequence and the clock we own agrees, you don't cheer. You corroborate. He mentioned a caustic applied to burn it away. He didn't name chemistry, he didn't have to. Subpoenaed records already flagged high alkaline purchases within the window. Not every receipt had a clean card imprint, but together they formed a short list of likely points of sale. We pulled any available surveillance again, focusing on the hours he named. Even when you don't get a clear face, a time-stamped vehicle class at the right pump is a piece you can sit beside the statement without forcing it. We pressed the edges. Who gave the order? Who did the lifting? Who drove and when? He assigned roles that mapped onto the house's everyday realities, who had the physical strength to move a body, who had access to keys, who felt most threatened by the victim's control of family money. He didn't paint anyone heroic, including himself. We marked each claim with a code, HBD, held back detail, CC, corridor clock, or U, unverifiable. The HBD stacked, the U's got shorter as we matched his times to receipts and duty logs. We asked for the disposal point. He couldn't give coordinates, but he marked a turnout near a line of trees and an angle off the asphalt where a car could nose in briefly. Our scene photos from 2008 showed tire impressions angling in and out at a spot consistent with his sketch. He described chemicals sprinkled and a towel left in place. He did not know we had recovered granular sodium hydroxide and preserved the towel. In cases like this, motive stories flex with the teller. Physical sequences don't. We left the room without promises. A proffer like his only has value if it survives friction, independent lab notes, independent timestamps, independent geography. Back at the lab, we reran fiber comparisons with reference speaker wire purchased from retailers he named. Class characteristics lined up. That's not a one-to-one fingerprint, but in domestic homicide, class plus withheld detail plus timeline can reach the threshold that moves a case. The human part is simple. A family had lived 3 years with a death that felt unsolved because no one had said the words out loud. Saying them isn't justice. Proving them is. We took his statement as a map, walked it against the records, and drew lines only where 2 independent sources agreed. The goal wasn't to close a file. It was to open charges that would stand. The insider's account didn't end the case, it gave prosecutors a clean bridge from evidence to charges. Detectives met with the DA and laid out only what could withstand court, the 3 details never released to the public: cloth around the neck to hide marks, a stereotype cord as ligature, and a household extinguisher used as a strike, the outbound timestamp on U.S. 95 toward Lee Canyon, the sodium hydroxide profile, and the medical window that placed the killing at home before transport. No theories, just the pieces that fit. Targeted warrants followed. Investigators collected stereo wire from the residence for class comparison, documented the missing extinguisher, and pulled archived retailer records for high alkaline purchases within the 5-day window. Where video still existed, timestamped pulls were secured. The lab logged each item against the 2008 exhibits, producing court-ready images and notes. Nothing dramatic, just a straight chain from claim to proof. Arrests proceeded once the package was complete. Charging language reflected actions the record supported: a domestic homicide carried out inside the house, then concealment by vehicle and chemicals at the mountain turnoff. Conspiracy and accessory counts covered help before and after death. The motive presented to the court stayed narrow and supported by facts: conflict over control of family finances, resentment building toward the victim who managed the money. Defense counsel reviewed discovery and measured trial risk against what the state would present, held back facts volunteered by an insider: a corridor anchor on the Lee Canyon route, class-consistent copper cord wire, and a medical sequence that made the desert a dump site, not the killing floor. Negotiations replaced speculation. The law moved. In December 2012, outcomes were entered and final. Stephanie Petrosino took responsibility for second-degree murder and received 13 years. Dolores D. Pinardo pled to voluntary manslaughter, 6 to 16 years. Richard Pinardo resolved as conspiracy/accessory, 2 to 5 years. No alternate verdicts, no second endings. One record, one resolution, consistent with the evidence and the timeline we've walked from the start. The last step was as important as the first. Detectives met with next of kin and detailed the sequence in plain language. The killing happened at home. The body was moved by car. Chemicals were used to speed decay. The mountain was a disposal site, not the scene. Clarity matters. Families live with a case long after court adjourns. They deserve an account they can repeat without guessing. If there's a lesson that leaves the file, it's simple and practical. When money and control become a fault line inside a household, the risk of harm escalates. If someone is isolating you from finances or making you feel unsafe, tell a professional, document what you can, and build a safety plan. Prevention is not drama, it's how tragedies are averted. This series ends as it began, with facts that don't change under pressure. Maria Marino, 52, was killed by ligature strangulation in Las Vegas in late May 2008. Her body was transported and left off Lee Canyon Road, dusted with lye. The case went quiet but never closed, and it moved when an insider stumbled over details only the perpetrators would know. Evidence, not rumor, carried it the rest of the way to court. I've learned this the hard way: when money, control, and silence start ruling a home, danger grows fast. Facts, not rumors, bring justice, and speaking up early can save a life. If this story moved you, tell me what stood out. Do you think neighbors, banks, or cameras made the biggest difference here? Drop your thoughts, and where you're watching from, in the comments so we can learn together. If you didn't like the video, say why. I read it all. And if you want more true cases told clearly and with respect, please subscribe to the channel.